Happy New Year, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus. Thank you for joining State of Tel Aviv today on New Year's Day. What a treat.
A treat indeed.
We have so much on our plates and so much to talk about, but I want to begin with the Trump peace plan and the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, we're stuck. Hamas is still in Gaza. They have absolutely no plans of leaving or disarming. And currently, there does not appear to be a viable option of or a tool how to disarm them, short of Israel relaunching full-scale kinetic operations in Gaza. And for various reasons, I don't think that Israel will be allowed to do such a thing, even though, from a pure military point of view, that may very well be what's necessary to do, because if we're going to stick to the format, the Trump plan and the Security Council resolution, the format stipulates pretty clearly phase one ends, and only when it ends do we move on to phase two. And phase two is the beginning of transition of power, the disarmament of Hamas, transition of power to the International Security Stabilization Force, Palestinian governance of technocrats, and rebuilding of Gaza, infrastructure, investment, and all of that. And yeah, we had tremendous achievement in the fact that our live and almost all of our murdered hostages were returned. But other than that, very little. And I just spoke with a group of non-Jewish students who are here visiting, a delegation brought here by the Jewish National Fund. Interesting to meet non-Jewish students here in Israel and learn a lot from their questions. And when they asked me about where do we stand and how optimistic am I about the future, I said I'm very optimistic about the future, and I laid out the reasons why. And I told them about the achievements of 25 and sure, the challenges that we have in 26 and forward. But I said that the area where I am the least optimistic is regarding Gaza, because I do not recognize neither political will nor military capacity to do what is necessary in order to improve the situation. We don't have any takers, nation states that are willing and capable of going in and conducting what we would call in UN parlance peace enforcement, as in using violence in order to establish peace or in order to minimize friction. A Chapter 7 type of mission. We don't see any countries. There's been talk about Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, about Pakistan, but none of them have stepped up and said, yes, Hineni, here I am, and I'm willing to go in and do the heavy lifting, knowing that it's going to include combat and that it's going to include casualties and that there will be soldiers, unfortunately, that will be transported back home in coffins. That is the reality, and I think that is the most deterring factor so far, knowing that it's unfinished business in Gaza, that Hamas is still there, and every day that goes by, Hamas entrenches itself and remains in power. It may not flourish, and there's surely a lot of suffering and a lot of instability still, but every day that goes by, Hamas cements its presence even more. So that's sadly where I see the situation. A lot has been said and spoken and debated, including at Mar-a-Lago, about whether or not there will be a Turkish presence. I don't think that's something that really is going to happen. I know that there are people who believe that it's feasible. I know that there are lots of people who are recommending it. And of course, that the Turks are very eager to do so. I think it would be a very poor long-term strategic blunder by Israel if it were to allow the Turks a foothold in Gaza. And I surely hope that won't happen. If it will, that'll be really an opening for all kinds of challenges, intel and subversion, and many other issues that I don't think that Israel has the bandwidth or the need to be dealing with. And I
Right.
hope that the government will be able to prevent that from happening.
It's interesting. You say that there are some countries, I assume, that think that Turkey participating in this ISF, International Stabilization Force, might be a good idea. Who other than Qatar might think that way, and possibly Egypt?
Well, I think that parts of the US establishment, political mostly, less military, have
Okay.
voiced support of that. Obviously, the president has been at least 50% positive towards it, and he is courting the idea, or he's looks as if he's warming to the idea. And then obviously Turkey itself, you mentioned Qatar correctly. I think I've heard insinuations from the Iranians, not clear official support, but I would assume and assess that they would more or less be in favor of it, not because they are fans of the Turks and not because they want to see Turkish expansion. They are adversarial, the Iranians and the Turks, but because they know that it would be a challenge for Israel and it's something that Israel doesn't want.
So you gave the whole Mar-a-Lago meeting in terms of substance 8 out of 10. On what basis?
I think that there was a lot of buildup and a lot of sour journalists, Israeli and international, were trying to make the usual very old buildup of as if there's a lot of daylight and disputes and tension between the two allies. And I think this, it should have been laid to rest a long time ago. I mean, I understand that media workers need to sell advertising space and that there needs to be some story. But, the story of, oh, how angry is Trump with Bibi and how big are the differences between the US and Israel, it's been spoken about so many times and it's been debunked quite a lot of times, almost as many times as it's been raised ahead of meetings. So, in terms of substance, looking at how President Trump answered questions about Israeli posture versus Hamas, how President Trump addressed Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Very important. Clarity that I think really ruffled Iranian feathers. Clarity from President Trump about red lines, what will be tolerated and what will not be tolerated. Very important. For the first time, the president said very clearly that if it before we were focusing, the US was focusing on nuclear weapons and the military nuclear weapons program. Now it's the nuclear weapons program and also ballistic missiles. That is a strategic achievement for Israel because that is what Israel has been speaking about and targeting, because Israel understands very clearly, as does the American military, that for the Iranians to have a nuclear weapons program doesn't mean a lot if they don't have the delivery systems, which are the ballistic missiles. And therefore, they are one. And this was, to the best of my knowledge, the first time that we saw the president really accommodate that line of thought and express very clearly that if the Iranians try to fix their nuclear weapons program, it'll be an immediate attack by the US and Israel. And if they'll focus on ballistic missiles, which they are, then it's a very probable and a likely attack by the US or by Israel. And those are strong statements.
I'm going to cut in here briefly and show you the clip of President Trump addressing exactly what Jonathan Conricus is speaking of here at the Mar-a-Lago press conference when he was asked to comment. Have a look and listen.
Remember this, if we didn't do what we did to Iran, just to make the subject just slightly different, you wouldn't have peace in the Middle East. You wouldn't have a deal signed in the Middle East. You wouldn't have a deal. Because other Arab nations, which are great people, I know them very well, I know them, they're great people, they wouldn't be able to have agreed to peace in the Middle East because you would have had a dark cloud hanging over everything. It wouldn't have been possible. So Iran has been greatly reduced in power, prestige. I don't want to use the word humiliation because, they're trying to build up again. But we can't let them build up because if they build up, there can't be peace in the Middle East.
Just want to flog the dead horse just a little bit more. Mar-a-Lago and the 8 out of 10. Based on what I've seen, read, and heard, it sounds like President Trump held the line, so to speak, on key points, saying Hamas has to disarm
Yep.
and Hamas has to relinquish power. And the friction, if there is any, I would expect is in when Israel agrees to move on to phase 2 of the Trump plan. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, I believe, is standing firm and saying we're not moving to stage 2 until the last body of a murdered Israeli, Rangvili, is returned.
Yep.
That's negotiable, and it also plays to Netanyahu's strengths to delay.
It
And
does
also,
indeed.
we have to understand the parameters before we say we're in stage 2. What is stage 2? What are we moving towards? Who is going to participate in the ISF, the on the ground military oversight, peacekeeper capability with guns? How is Hamas going to be disarmed and removed from power? And who are the technocrats that are going to take their place? Keep in mind, Tony Blair had been sort of identified before or the day it was announced by Trump
Yeah.
and others that Sir Tony Blair was the kind of top candidate. And he's now removed from the running, or seems to be. He himself said, I'm not going to do it. A number of Arab states had problems with Sir Tony taking the role, and I don't see an obvious candidate. So the 8 out of 10 you're giving, I'm assuming, comes from the fact that the key points with respect to disarming Hamas and removing them from power remain. President Trump remains committed to those 2 points.
Yeah.
Then
But the
after that,
progress
it's
itself, yeah, but the
yeah, it's
progress
probably
itself is very limited. It's a 3 or a 4 out of 10, if at best.
and that's why my sense is that the Americans are pushing or trying to push Israel to move a little more or allow even the appearance of movement towards phase 2 to begin so that it doesn't seem to be stalled, which it is.
I didn't see that, Vivian. I was looking for American language and insinuation applying more pressure on Israel to move on. I didn't see that. And I think the main reason why it isn't there is because the Americans, when they look beyond the curtain to see what they have lined up, there isn't a lot of stuff lined up behind the curtain. So there's no need to push the Israelis, because once the Israelis say, okay, you know what, open the curtain, there isn't much there. And we spoke about no willing partners to do peacekeeping or law peace enforcement, and no real understanding of who that technocratic government will be. And that government, that is a few months in the future. First, per the agreement, per the Security Council resolution, Hamas needs to be disarmed and out of power. That isn't going to be something instant. And as long as there aren't soldiers, military, that are willing to do it, then no need to push the Israelis, because it isn't happening yet.
Yeah, and the concern, of course, here that we're dancing around is that the IDF is going to have to go back in and finish the job. And that will, if it's going to come about, is likely to come about in the coming year. I would think in the coming months even. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think it's fair to assume that up until the American midterms, that'll be a very important milestone. And I think there will be pressure on the Israeli side from Israel to get things done before the midterms, knowing, based on history, not a lot more, that usually the electorate goes contrary to the president, and that the second part of a presidential term is more challenging in terms of real executive power, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And I think Israel is very cognizant of that. I think the president is cognizant. Maybe he believes, and he probably knows best, that this time will be different. Maybe the Democratic Party is in such disarray and so engulfed by fringe elements that they won't be able to do the historical norm. I don't know. But bottom line is, I think that a lot, what needs to be done, probably has to be done before the midterms.
And and of course, the midterms this year also kind of converge with possibly Israeli elections. The Israeli election has to be held at the latest October
Yeah.
2026. That's the smart money, in my view, is on that it will be earlier, because kind of weird and tricky to have an election or on or around the third anniversary of October 7th. So we'll see about that. Okay. So Gaza, basically, you give them an 8 out of 10, but the reality is nothing really seems to have changed or happened other than America reaffirming its commitment to disarm Hamas and to have them removed from power, right?
Yeah,
This is okay.
that's the
So
bottom
let's
line.